Okay, I will argue essentially from three perspectives that it makes more sense to argue, or at least to identify ourselves as free beings than determined. The first will be moral agency and moral responsibility. So according to Aristotle, we can act in two ways, either voluntarily or involuntarily. So if we act voluntarily, what does that mean? He says that voluntary actions are those actions which are under our control. So this would include habits and dispositions that may seem to be out of our control, but nonetheless result from earlier choices made when the matter was in our power. So let me give you a specific example of what that might be like. So we've all been in a situation where we might know somebody who has maybe partied too much and decided that they want to drive their car. So in the case of a person who drives their car, we don't say that they're not culpable or responsible for their actions because in some sense they weren't altogether there, right? What do we say? We say they're culpable because they knew before they even started drinking, the activities that could happen post-drinking. Specifically, when I enter into a car, as a rational being, I know I need to be of sound mind. This is why we all take driver's tests and get requirements to drive. So we know in the state of being inebriated that we will not have that capacity. We will in fact not be able to drive correctly, at least as correct we could if we were rational and altogether there. So what Aristotle says is, this is what we would call culpable ignorance or negligence. Still free, despite the fact that what? We still have that component of us that might not altogether be there. Involuntary acts. He says actions that are involuntary result from constraint and ignorance. So ignorance in this sense means lack of knowledge. And this could happen in a few ways. So we could all understand the nature of an infant lacking knowledge. So he's not really referring to that sort of instance, but we could all understand where that position comes from. The real issue here is when there's ignorance with regard to activity. So if I commit an action involuntarily, what does that entail? An involuntary act entails, for example, if I were a doctor and I didn't know a person's medical history, or he was unaware of, say, an allergy he might have, it would be an involuntary act if I gave him some sort of treatment and it actually ended up harming him or killing him. That is, I absolutely did not have the intent on hurting him. I'm certainly going to feel bad and have regret, but I don't have the same culpability, and I'm not negligent in the same sort of way as the drunk driver. Hence, those reasons are involuntary as opposed to voluntary. I did not have the power in those instances to make what we would call the correct choice, or at least a choice that wouldn't end up in harm or death. Okay, that was one. Second, I want to talk about the nature of pragmatism, specifically the phenomenon of lived experience. So not only do we feel free, but from the pragmatic perspective, free will explains the reality of our experience. For example, again, Americans living their lives based on the assumption that personal freedom and responsibility are valid concepts is an absolutely compelling reason for believing in the reality of these concepts, that they actually are real. Our belief in free choice and personal responsibility infuses our ability and our beliefs in three key areas: self-improvement, morality, and social improvement for everybody. And obviously we could go into countless other dimensions where these would affect us in our public and private lives. Okay, so let's take these in turn. Self-improvement. Personally, we need freedom to make different choices from those we previously made. If we are determined, then what allows us to just make different choices? What allows us to learn to become a different being? If we're determined, we are going to be the same being. In some sense, our freedom to choose and the requirements of having free will establish the possibility of future possibilities, as opposed to being completely caused by whatever methods my counterpart is going to suggest. Morally speaking, if our actions are merely caused by genes or uncontrolled impulses, then there's no point in trying to develop an ethos or a character. What would be the point? I am merely what I am caused to be. Therefore, I cannot really be responsible, nor can I really talk about an ethos or developing an ethos, because I'm simply a system of causation. The third, social improvement. In order to create a better world, such as the one Cody is suggesting, a world free from poverty, crime, discrimination, and other destructive forces for social good, requires the ability to change who we were for who we now choose to be. And if we don't do those things, we can't expect anything to change for the positive. We can't expect to have that type of sentiment with regard to a utopia if we don't have free will. Lastly, from the existentialist perspective, I would submit, as Sartre says, that our existence precedes our essence. That is, we do not have a fixed human nature. We have the possibility of becoming that which we want to become. That is to say, our nature is determined by the actions we choose to do. Freedom in this sense is unavoidable from the existentialist point of view, and even sometimes very uncomfortable, because we have to be responsible for all those actions that we commit. And this is just a natural characteristic of life. So if existence really does precede essence, as Sartre says and as the existentialist says, there is no explaining things away by this reference to a fixed nature or a given human nature, whatever that might be.
50 seconds.
So the most important thing is what we do with our freedom, and life gets its meaning and purpose from what we do with that freedom. Thank you.
You said that freedom is required by change. So in order for us to change, we have to have freedom to change. Why can't those changes be the result of a changing environment? Our environment is constantly changing over time, so wouldn't a different environment reacting on the same person result in a different outcome?
Only if that person chooses to be a different person. You can't control nature. You can't control the way that nature works. There are natural laws within the world. We are not exactly like nature. We have a distinction between, say, animals and other natural creatures in the world, insofar as we are not just animated, we are not just beings that simply act through causality. We have the ability to absolutely choose to be whoever we want to be. And those possibilities are limited. The possibilities are not unlimited for the natural world.
My problem there is that choosing who you want to be, does that not depend on another will? Wouldn't you have to will to choose who you want to be? And then wouldn't that will be the consequence of a higher will to want to will that? So it results in an infinite regress, and it doesn't seem to reflect reality if only the will is acting on the will and choosing what you are. What you choose to be has to be in context with something in reality. That is, you have to learn what is good in order to choose to be good.
Well, no, I would disagree with that wholeheartedly. I think there's a facticity about our existence. That facticity is that we're born with certain inclinations, capacities that are latent and nascent to us, right? So the fact that we do have a genetic code, the fact that we do have an environment, that we have upbringing, doesn't negate the fact that we have a will that has to respond to those aspects, right? That is, an infant doesn't have the ability to be a rational being at that point. It doesn't have the ability to have sexual desire. It doesn't have the ability to be a freely autonomous being as we would find it as major adults.
And I would say that, or my problem once again is that the will has to be caused by something else, that is experience. The reason a baby can't do anything at the beginning is because it hasn't had any experience. That's why it doesn't have value.
No, it has to do with development, not experience.
Well, development is experience.
Well, they go hand in hand, but you're arguing about they have to have certain experiences as opposed to they're a creature that desires.
All right, thank
That's
you.
the nature
We're
of our
going to
existence.
move on to the first negative construction.